welcome to the dungeon with Harlan and Andrew.
We're here. We're live. We're doing it.
I'm Andrew Orvidal.
And I'm Harlan Kelly.
And this is a talk show where we chat with people who run tabletop role-playing games about all things tabletop role-playing game. And with us today, very special guest, we have Stephen Dewey, the creator of Cavalry Games and a variety of games such as 10 Candles, a game that we love here on this very stream, and we've run a few episodes that you may have seen. So thanks so much for joining us, Stephen.
Hello, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
One of the first questions we always ask every guest, because it's a great framing question, is just could you give us your own quick personal history with tabletop role-playing games?
Sure. I got involved in tabletop games when I was in middle school. My older brother was playing D&D at the time. I never quite actually got into D&D, but I'd occasionally play or run little random homebrew kid games. That evolved into Dungeons and Dragons in high school, and I brought that forward into college. And college was also around the time that I got more, I had my eyes opened to more of the indie game community and a lot of the more independent story games that are out there, which sort of led me along a path that eventually ended up with making games. So for the past now, something like 10 years or so, it's just been, I've just been awash in all manner of game, from Dungeons and Dragons to the most obscure little indie games you've never heard of. All of them have been a blast.
Man, we all know that slide one way or another. I feel like we've talked about that a couple times on this show, where it's like, well, I started here, and for some reason Dungeons and Dragons seemed like too far of a nerd thing, and then I started it and fell down the rabbit hole. It's just like different versions of that. So
Yeah.
I love just hearing that. Just because Andrew and I have been talking about this real quick, and I don't want to. We have lots of things we want to talk to you about, but
Sure.
I want to know. You said one of those little tiny, little indie games that you've never heard of. What's one that's just at the top of your brain that's like, I've really enjoyed playing this lately, or like this is my one that I think is exceptional, or just the first one that pops in your head?
Well, one of the problems is that it's tough because you never know what community you're talking with. So some that I mentioned might, to me, are indie games, but some of them have become so popular that they're really they almost don't feel like that.
Sure.
The very last game I actually had a chance to play, short of my weekly D&D sessions, was Bluebeard's Bride, which was absolutely a stunning and amazing horror game. I've played a game, Polaris, not that long ago with some folks. Yeah. The old Polaris, not the new one, not the sci-fi one, but the other one where you're sad ice knights in the North Pole. That was one I played a while ago with some people, and I've been trying to get together again. My bookshelf is stuffed with a bunch of them, so it's really all about what I can get a group together for.
Right. I selfishly just want that tiny little reading list from you. 10 Candles.
I can send you a reading list.
Oh,
you want a reading list?
I would be honored.
Totally.
10 Candles is one of my I'm not super well versed. I don't know those games. I don't consider myself someone who knows a ton of games, but 10 Candles is just like one of my all-time favorite games I've ever played, and so I just wanted that list of what's in your head. So thank you for that.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have, in terms of creating tabletop games, do you have like a guiding philosophy? I'm only familiar with two of the games that you've created, 10 Candles and To Serve Her Wintry Hunger, which is maybe the best name for any tabletop role-playing game ever. It sounds like a black metal song title. I love it. But I was just curious if you had is there like a guiding philosophy that you start with, or do you just treat every game as its very own individual system, game, everything.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one of those odd things where, relatively speaking to some other designers in the community, I'm still a very new designer. I haven't really put out a huge list of games. You could play all my tabletop games in a weekend with some friends pretty easily.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
As opposed to some other indie designers who've been in it for 20 years, right? But so a lot of my, the weird thing that sort of happens when you're starting off is you're just making games the way that you think they would be the most fun. And a lot of the theory and the guiding principles and building a foundation is a little bit retroactive. So I don't want to pretend like I had all of this in my head when I started, but the basic ideas that I think my games tend to shoot for, one of the guiding principles is that the actual mechanics reflect whatever the setting or the story is. So there is, if you kind of like hold up a mirror to the sort of story you're trying to tell, the mechanics are going to be doing everything possible to fit hand in hand with that and support that kind of storytelling, as opposed to being independent from it. It's all connected.
I love that so much because I feel like I can see that how that works in 10 Candles. Like, it's a game that you're only playing in one night, so you don't want to be too attached to the character. Like, fits all of these things, and the design. That's one of the reasons I love the game. Is like you can see how the design works to tell the story, and so when you said that, I was like, yes, of course, that's your principle because it's in your games already. That's super cool.
Yeah. I think I would have to say the other one that comes to mind would be designing mechanical rule systems in such a way that they support the kind of stories and both emotional storytelling and just storytelling that I want you to get out of the game. If you have a rule system that's that's like more loose and abstract, you can get some really amazing games out of it. But a lot of the time it really comes down to the quality of the players or the quality of the GM in order to sort of carry the weight of that game to make it something incredible. And if you've got a bad group or a GM who's not really invested or there's no buy-in, sometimes you can have sort of a flop of a game session. So one of the things I try to do with my rules is to take on a lot of the heavy lifting so that you can reliably get these really great gaming experiences, or at least the intended game experience, every time you play, because the rules are doing a lot of that hard work for you, and you can just sort of go along with it, and everything sort of shapes out the way you'd want it to anyway. So anytime I can take weight off of the GM or the players and put it on the rules instead to make some of those, story decisions, I like to do that so that there's less improv required. There's less, things that players have to sort of manufacture out of nothing. The game takes you a good distance, and then you can just sort of pick up the rest and bring it towards whatever conclusion is awaiting you.
Nice. Yeah, one of my favorite things about 10 Candles and most terrifying parts of it as a GM is how there's like truly no prep needed. It's just like, hey, y'all want to play? Let's just sit down. We'll start playing. I just as a GM in general, I'm used to spending at least a couple hours prepping an adventure. I've got a bunch of things in my back pocket. I know this, and so whenever I play 10 Candles, it feels a bit like walking on that tightrope of like, oh god, I didn't prep anything. Oh god, and it's like, oh yeah, you're not supposed to. But it's such a cool dynamic where everyone starts at that same level, both the game master and the players. It's almost like there's something that's a little more egalitarian about the system. Also in that the players get narration rights on scenes, which is something that I've kind of only seen in 10 Candles, where it's just like the players get to say what happens, which is also very cool. And I think it's a nice power share instead of games where the GM just tells you every single thing that you find, and you're kind of at the mercy of the game master, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, and I think what you said, egalitarian, like it super sticks out in your games too, because, and I think I've seen a lot of games do things like, there are GM-less games, there are games where people get moments to be like, I do this scene now or whatever, like I take over, but there's something just uniquely, I think it's egalitarian. I don't know a better word than that. It's like it feels like a collaborative story. Like you're really all like when the rules are, when you're all on the same playing field, it's all established. When you go around and say what happens and you say your truth, you can say some crazy helpful things to you. Like right. Huge broken things. But then the GM can just kind of like match that energy, and it feels like you are all joining in on this like wavelength that is really unique and fun. So.
That is it's one of my favorite parts of 10 Candles, hands down, and it hinges so deeply on, like, you haven't seen that in a lot of games because you really can't do that in a lot of games.
Yeah. One
of the ways that 10 Candles makes it work is because it's no matter how much power you give the players, it's not going to change the outcome at the end.
Yes.
If player, and it's why it's so important to let players know from the start how the game ends.
Yeah.
Because then, even though they have all that narrative power, they can't necessarily help shape the end of the story because that's already set in stone. They can just shape each of these individual moments and make them as interesting as possible, which might be with something helpful or might be with something harmful, whichever one's more interesting in that moment around the table.
I feel like I could spend the whole time just gushing about how beautiful that specific aspect of the game is, because it is like, whenever I teach new people how to play D&D, I have to like convince them at the start that I am not against them. And it's like a thing we talked on here a bunch, is that it is kind of a secret, or it is kind of like built in that the GM is running things, but the secret that any DM knows is that they're not really as in charge of the story as the players feel like. They're kind of like following the energy of the players. And to see it so beautifully built into the rules of like, we're not competing against each other. There's no winners. We're all losing together. And instead of, like, it's built in to make moments interesting, and that's awesome. So.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was most curious about the game. Is like, really, you tell the players that everyone dies at the end? That's so weird. Doesn't that take the suspense out of it? And but then once you see it in action, it's like, oh no, that's the best. That is the best way to do it, because then everyone can, instead of being like, I found a tank, I found a helicopter, I'm gonna win this game. It's like, no. We can tell a story, and it's very cool, very cool. I don't want to dwell only on 10 Candles, but I do have some more 10 Candles questions.
Yeah.
My friend Clinton, one of the producers in the horror stream of Blood, he's the one who told me about 10 Candles. He submitted some questions that he was curious about too, that I was also curious. But we were both curious, like, have you heard of any especially unique modules? And for those of you watching, a module is like the setup scenario for a game of 10 Candles. Have you heard of any particularly surprising modules that anyone's come up with? And have you heard of any instances of they that stick out to you, the antagonists in the game, or that you've experienced while you were playing?
I would say that I have not. A lot of people have shared with me modules that they've run before. I think possibly one of the most interesting ones I've seen was there's a Twitch channel, I think, called the RPG Clinic, that did a playthrough of 10 Candles, and their module was that they were a group of individuals that were trapped in a theater. And the whole, like, a lot of them worked there or were otherwise involved there. And there was a lot of very surreal horror things going on over the course of play, which I thought was really interesting. Most of the weird or surprising modules I've been exposed to have been ones I've run, because I've run this game so much that I really like to play around with my own system and make it incredibly strange or possibly funny. I ran one that I've wanted to run. I haven't actually run it yet for a while, but I've been a very big fan of is the players are a group of doomsday cultists, modern day doomsday cultists. They don't believe in the stuff. They just show up because, you get free uniforms. There's like every Friday they order pizza. No one has to pay for anything, but they go through the motions. And then one night after they have their own little private hangout and rituals, the world goes dark very suddenly. And they have to come to grips with the fact that this cult, which they were not invested in whatsoever, they actually did something. And now all the monsters are worshiping them as their summoners. And it's this comedy of horrible errors as these half-hearted doomsday cultists that have accidentally brought about the end of the world are trying to reverse whatever they did. Because they weren't interested in any of this from the get-go. Like there's so much variety to play around with things.
There's even a module where you can all be dogs. I've never braved that one because I was like, I can't. As GM, I don't want to narrate these dogs are gonna die.
Right. There's some really tough ones. Some comedic ones I've run. I've really delved out into like odd genres like. One that I ran way back when I was first playtesting was that the players were a group of like Avenger-style Power Ranger-adjacent superheroes.
Oh boy!
And they were, going up against a apocalyptic level big bad supervillain, and we all know that they're going to die as a result of this fight.
Boy.
But maybe they can save the world first.
And
right? Maybe they can save the day.
Marvel, but losing. That's so good.
Right, like
so
Marvel,
good.
but maybe they win. Maybe they save the day, but at what cost, sort of thing.
Man.
There's so many weird ways you can go with it. So many weird monsters I've seen over the. I think one of the most entertaining ones that I actually ran was based around a spaceship. That as part of the spaceship's construction, it was like a space station, and as part of its construction, they had this temporal time machine device that basically meant if any critical damage happened to the space station or the crew, it would sort of revert them back, 5 or 10 minutes in time, so that they would have time to correct whatever happened.
Oh boy.
So every single time a candle went out, someone died on the ship. One of the characters died, or there was a horrible malfunction, and the next scene began with them starting at the beginning, knowing that this device has gone off, but not knowing what caused it. And we'd sort of skip forward, so we'd get more and more of the story as they avoid their old mistakes, and slowly come to find out what's been happening on this ship. How long have they been stuck in this loop? Can they ever escape it? Obviously 10 candles, so they can't. But it was its own level of like tragic horror with just dying over and over again and not being able to escape it.
Okay.
Like there's so many interesting ways to approach the game. I geek out about it all the time because I love running 10 candles. It's a different adventure every time I run it.
Andrew, I now want to run 10 candles now. I feel like I've been hesitant because I just really enjoy playing in Andrew's games, and now I'm like, nope, after just having that spark of that list that you went down, I'm like, cool, I'm just going to pick all my favorite Star Trek episodes and just run them as,
put them in there.
Yeah.
Totally.
Get weird with it, like have fun with it, absolutely.
Also, it's so cool that you love running your own games still. I feel like that is
That's a sign of a good game.
Yeah, it's just like an unsung aspect of this is that you're sitting here like, I just want to run more of this. Like I've run so many of that, and it's fun every time. That's just such a cool element. That's awesome.
I feel like there was definitely a period right after publishing it where I'd been on the the play test train for so long that I'm like, I need a break of like a year. But every time I do go back to it, I whether it's to like, do any rules need to be updated or anything like that, I'm just really happy with how it is, and I always enjoy running it. So
awesome.
It's been reliable.
This is a question that came up in one of our games. I'm just curious if you have you ever let a player live? Like contextually, we had a game, and one of the players in our 10 Candles game, she was just like getting the roles. She was the only person left. Yeah. She had survived. She was brutally injured. She was limping around, just going from situation to situation. and wait, she did not live. She died because that's the framework of the game. But I was just curious if you'd ever had a situation come up where finally you were like, okay, you lived, or is it does it have a 100% fatality rate?
I will say there's a couple answers to that. One is the very first group that ever playtested 10 Candles, they all survived. I did not let that happen afterwards, but they're the only canonical survivors.
What a claim to fame! I love it.
back when I played with my girlfriend at the time, and now wife, and her two roommates, they all survived. They all got away. But ever since then, usually the two branches to this. Usually not. I will often sometimes I will fade to black if it seems appropriate, where I leave the death unspoken, but we all know what's going to happen. Like I've had, someone parachuting out of a helicopter down into that has just blown up down into a dark forest, and they can see and hear the sound of the monsters closing in. But everyone else had been dead for several minutes at that point, and this seems like a tidy place to tie the ribbon on this. So sometimes it will fade to black when a fate is sort of known. If I ever let someone survive, this is never a thing I would talk or ever admit to my players before running it. It's so important that they do not believe that is an option.
Yes.
So, if you get to the end of your story and everyone's bought in and this player is okay dying because they know that that's the structure, but the roles land so well and there's a legitimate, really interesting opportunity for them to survive, sure. If that's where the story's going, why not?
Yeah.
That's interesting, because the main reasons it's important that everyone dies is so that players can engage with the game correctly from the beginning to get the most out of it. That's the reason it's so critical that everyone dies. As soon as you take that away or give them an option to live, the whole game breaks. Yeah. As will be shooting for that one thing, because it's in our blood. We all want to win. We just want to be successful and have that happy ending. But if once in a blue moon, the stars align and you really have, not just, they've been acing every role, but it fits with the story, it's impactful and emotional, why not? Use your best judgment, but, make it clear to the players that will never happen again, even if it secretly might happen again.
Yeah, that is such a good articulation of it, because I think I've been in situations in other games that this isn't designed for, and when I don't get the dice roll, I had a DM one time playing Dungeons and Dragons where they said they kind of waived a dice roll because my character died. It was clear that they died, and he felt just didn't want to hit the gas on that moment, and I felt disappointed in that moment because I was like, no, I didn't get the roll. And so I think the situation Andrew was talking about, how good was that ending though, Andrew? When the character did finally die, it felt like, and there it is, kind of thing, And
it did work out, yeah. But I was tempted because she'd gone on this grueling adventure. And I was like, it'd be kind of cool if she ended up on this boat out in the ocean where you never knew her fate out in the ocean. But as luck had it, she got a great death, and it all worked out. But
that fade to black is super cool too, because how many horror movies do that, where they're like, all right, they're just in this shitty situation, you tell me.
Exactly. Yeah.
What when it comes to playtesting a game that you're creating, do you have any advice or strategies for even how to go about that? Is it just play the game and take notes, or do you have steps that you look to take?
Yeah, I mean, it sure is play the game a whole bunch. Try to play the game with different people a whole bunch. Take notes. I think being really clear with your players about what you're looking for out of that playtest is really important. A lot of the time, if you just go into a playtest, what most players will, with people that want to help you, what they're going to wind up doing is just giving you constructive criticism and their suggestions for how certain things should work. And a lot of the time, that's not necessarily what you as a game designer might be looking for. You might be looking to be I really just want to figure out how this one mechanic works and if this is fun, or I want to just play through, like character creation and see if it is engaging or what have you. See where things fall apart, see where things don't feel right. I feel like a lot of it is trusting your instincts. And if you get a lot of pushback from your players or from yourself, like this really isn't going as quickly as I want it to, or it seems more complicated than it needs to be, all of these things, pay attention to where you kind of get that feeling in your gut. Because if you're just writing out a game, everything's going to feel great. But as soon as you get it around a table, that's when you're going to start noticing, oh, actually, that doesn't feel right. Or that didn't happen here like it happened in my head, or it didn't get the reaction I was hoping it would have.
Yeah.
Taking notes, playing a bunch. And then eventually, once you're pretty happy with the game, put that game in the hands of people that are not you and have them run the game for their friends when you're not even in the room, and come back with their feedback. Because it needs to hold up beyond just you running the game for your friends, and actually be out there, because you'll get a ton of feedback of like where people were confused about the rules, or how it performed in a vacuum without you being there. And just repeat that process over and over again as well until you're happy with it, they're happy with it. Obviously, the game designer makes the final calls, but it's a lot of work. Like 10 Candles was a product of like 3 or 4 years of work and play testing. Like it took a while to get to its final form. So it can be a lot, but it's definitely worth it.
How did you know you're done?
I feel like it had gotten to the point where there were a couple pieces of the game that still didn't sit well with me. And once I sort of resolved them and played it, even just like once or twice with these final tweaks, it just felt like, all right, this is exactly what I want. Like it almost feels like, it's maybe not true for everyone. I'm sure a lot of designers out there will comment like, I'm never perfectly happy with a game. I'm experiencing that a little bit with the game I'm working on currently, so that can always be tough. But when for 10 Candles at least, it's like, yeah, this feels exactly like I want it to. I'm getting great feedback every time I play it. Everything feels like it works. So, and then you sort of just pull the trigger, and if you were wrong, you make changes down the road.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
that's the best you can do.
That's one of my favorite things about tabletop role-playing games, that so many of the systems, it's just acknowledged, this is a flexible system, and you, the person on the other end, can make your own adjustments, which is really cool. I like that, just culturally across the board. Another question that Clinton had regarding 10 Candles was, there are all these cool ritual elements, the lighting of the candles, and you don't light them all at once, the blowing out of the candles. There's even a ritual phase in the game. From the get-go, did you intend for these ritualistic elements, or was this something that kind of developed through playtesting where you heightened them as you made the game?
That was really, the ritual components were really in the game from the start. I knew that the game really required a level of buy-in and involvement from everyone involved. So having these sort of ritual processes to set up the game, to start the game, and these phases that come after every scene, like a heartbeat throughout the game, where less and less is being explored, less and less is being said. It was all very intentional from the start to ground people in the game, get people involved, make an impression, and to have an emotional impact right out the gate for players so that they're more invested than they might be otherwise. Especially, I think, for one-shot games, you need that in a really big way. Like, if you want to bring people in, get them invested, and get them able to dive deep enough into a character or a story within just a few hours, and then it's done and gone and we're not ever going to revisit it, you need to have some vehicles to get them immersed and involved and like ready to hit the ground running right from the get-go. And all of the ritual phrases and the lighting of the candles and everything it builds towards that happening.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah, it's pretty brilliant, because when the candles first come out and when they're being lit, there's sometimes a vibe with players of like, what am I getting into? Like, what is it? But then later in the game, when there's only 2 or 3 candles left, those candles are real important, and the players are real on board with what's happening with those candles. So it's very fun to watch just watch that evolution over the course of 2 to 3 hours as the candles get pretty important.
Yeah.
Well, that is 30 minutes. We have some good questions in chat, but I guess let's do our roll table, and maybe we can take a question or two from chat.
Happy to answer any chat questions.
Yeah, Andrew, do you want to? I'll pull the chat questions if you want to get that roll table pulled up, and
I'm ready.
Go roll away.
Right.
See where
I'm
you get.
making a roll. Got 14.
Right,
14. Solid. Okay, and this is generally a roll table with based on Dungeons and Dragons, but you could you could answer this for any game that you run. I don't know if we've ever asked this of any of our guests, but as a game master, do you believe in fudging rolls? Yes or no? Whether it's in any game.
Yeah, so I do play a ton of D&D. I run D&D professionally for a couple groups. So I certainly play a lot of that. It's interesting. The answer has changed recently, and I think it will change again in the future. So back before the world sort of caught on fire, and I actually played in person with all of my groups, I think there was substantially more dice fudging time to time in the pursuit of telling interesting stories, or in the pursuit of supporting players in what I think would be a really interesting moment, or never like against the players, always in their favor to help the game be more substantial of a story, I think. Totally. To patch up some really bad luck that would leave everyone at the table kind of feeling like trash, and smooth it over and make it a better experience. Now I'm running all of my games online through virtual tabletops, where all of my roles for the first time are out in the open. And I kind of have been loving it. Like there haven't been really any moments since then where I've really felt like I needed to fudge anything. I just let the dice lie where they may. The players see all my rolls, and that has also been really interesting. It's actually also sparked one of my more recent games that I'm running. The players very intentionally are buying into sort of a high difficulty, potentially high body count session, or a campaign where all the roles are very intentionally out in the open because we're not fudging anything. If people die, they die. And that's also super interesting. And I think probably what will happen when the world fixes itself and is less on fire and we can go back to playing in person is the answer to that question will probably be, I'm going to talk to my groups about it on an individual basis and feel out every group I play with. One of them, it is a question that will be added to my session zeros from now until the end of time. Are you interested in me occasionally fudging rolls if I think it will help the party or the story or everyone have a good time, to save you from potentially catastrophic bad luck or like a TPK that could just, kill all the fun we're having? Or would you like me to be genuine or even roll my rolls in public? I'm happy with either because I genuinely am, and leave it up to the groups to discuss. Because I think that is a decision that should kind of be made communally at this point.
That's such a good answer. Because that's exactly why I've ever used it too. I think with our stream game, I don't think I've fudged any dice rolls to my memory. Like I didn't feel like a moment where I made that decision if I did.
Yeah.
Because it's more public, and the only time I ever do it in personal games is exactly for that reason. It's just like, this would not be fun. Like an unfun thing is happening, and not in like, I got a critical one, and a bad thing is happening. It's like, this is just, it won't be fun at the table. So that's a good answer.
Yeah, I think some players play D&D for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons they're not playing D&D is for there to be potentially murderous combats or really bad luck. Like that's a part they are not interested in with the game. But other players may really like all of the aspects of it, including the danger of like being killed and things like that, and it makes their successes and victories feel more earned to them, and they're focused more on that than the story. Every player wants something different, so there's no reason to not talk to your players about it.
Totally.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've experienced both now too since quarantine. A friend of the show, Josh Smith, I play in a game that he runs, and not only does he make his rolls there in Roll20, he will also tell you the DC. So it is bracingly effective, really knowing, living and dying by those numbers with no wiggle room, no fudgery going on. It's like, oh wow, this is it feels like the game on hard mode for sure.
Yeah, I'll do that with really important roles too. I'll be sure to do it in front of players, so there's no question, like what is happening here. So we have one great question in the chat that I think we can stick with. Is a couple of them touch on things we talked about during this and that you've answered. But are there any types of stories you really want to tell but haven't figured out a mechanic to tell them yet?
Haven't figured out a mechanic? That sounds like a... Whenever I encounter something like that, I feel challenged. I feel like, and I must resolve it. So I feel like there are so many interesting aspects of life or of stories, and I do often feel that they could be approached with mechanics. Like a mechanic can be designed to satisfy most things. I play a game with my friends and people who know how into tabletop games I am, where if something random is discussed or like a movie trailer comes on or something like that, I search my memory banks and I will say, oh, there's an RPG for that. Oh, there's an RPG for that. Because increasingly there are so many freaking RPGs out there that if you're looking for a certain kind of story, there is almost definitely someone who has made RPG specifically to deal with that. Or if you are not looking for a specific kind of story and just looking for something really weird that you've never considered, there's definitely RPGs out there for that as well. But I think that mechanics, from a design perspective, building mechanics to solve problems or to create or to mechanize complicated or not traditional RPG things is really fun. One of the game that I'm working on right now, which was kickstarted a year or two ago, Gather, that was on Kickstarter, still not out yet, but eventually. Basically, the whole rule set of Gather is mechanizing a conversation. Like the rules of that game are how you get to have the conversation, who gets to talk, when do you get to talk, and it's all about shifting power dynamics of a conversation that move around the table, right? And that's was a really fun mechanic to build and to watch grow and evolve as it's been play tested, because it's just not like social conversation is not often a thing that is supported by mechanics in tabletop games.
That's so cool. Yeah.
It also brings to mind, I feel like I just saw the other day, the YouTube, I don't know if they stream because I've never actually watched it, but the tabletop actual play Dimension 20, which is the college humor. They just put out a tweet the other day where they had built for their Unsleeping City campaign rules for addiction and recovery. And it was like, hey, here's a really serious set of rules for if you want to play characters who are struggling to recover from addiction. Here's a mechanic for that. And I'd skimmed through it. I'm like, this is really clever. And I think a really good sign of the fact that regardless of the story you want to tell, sometimes it can be supported with sometimes very complicated, sometimes very emotional mechanics. But it's always it's so interesting what people are doing with design nowadays.
Yeah, when you started talking about this, I was like, man, that reminds me of this mechanic from Dimension 20, because they're just doing amazing stuff with games over there. But I feel the same way about Matt Colville's Strongholds and Followers. Mm-hmm. It's been so cool to see him. He loves politics. He loves a game with big world politics. He loves that Game of Thrones game, and to see him build it was really inspiring to me to be like, oh yeah, you can just take a thing that you like and then make a mechanic for it so your players can do it just like you're talking about. Because it's inspiring. It's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many interesting things. I believe it's what was the other one? I think her name was Sarah Thompson, who put out the rules for the combat wheelchair in D&D earlier this year. Like, that was another amazing example of, like, this is something I want in my story. This is something I want in my game. I'm going to make rules to support it, and it's become incredibly popular. It's just like, it's a fantastic sign of all the really good work that some people are doing right now to bring their stories into their favorite game. And like, sometimes you'll see people make stuff for D&D or just spin off and make their own absolutely incredible game. That's going on. Like, it's really exciting to see. Tabletop RPG design space is an exciting place to be right now.
I don't think I've left an episode of the show feeling I'm gonna like start working on stuff after this. I'm like, just feel like, just right? you talking about it, I'm like seeing all these pieces that you clearly have like worked on for so long, being able to articulate them, but now having them in my head, I'm like, oh, I want to go do that. I want to do it. Like, yeah.
Oh, it's so much fun. There's so much work to do, but it's all exciting and really, really something to look forward to.
Definitely. Thank you so much for being a guest. I know we went a little long. Thanks for sticking around, and
this was a blast. Chat. Thank you so much for having me.
Is there anything you'd like to plug? I know you have a Patreon. Anything you want to give a shout out?
Yeah, I have a Patreon. It's just my name, Stephen Dewey. You can look me up on Patreon. It's been a little slow lately, but I post everything over there from. I've actually been posting a lot of Dungeons and Dragons DM advice for some weird Dungeons and Dragons tools and tricks I use. I will post it if you're interested in my games. That's like the best place to follow me about that. And at certain levels, just get copies of my games whenever I release them. So there's a lot of fun stuff going over there. It's a really great community of people if you want to support my eventual quest to just do game design full time. But you can also follow me on Twitter at ShiftyGinger is my Twitter. I post about all sorts of things over there. And keep an eye out, I guess, for Gather, Children of the Evertree. That will be coming sometime next year, fingers crossed, if everything comes together perfectly. And that is a game I'm very excited for. But you can find all my existing games at cavalrygames.com.
Awesome.
I'm gonna go subscribe to that Patreon after this, because all of those things are things I read on the internet anyway.
Hey, sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thanks everybody in chat.
Just a quick plug, if we can. Andrew and I run a game every Monday. If you are someone who is not here for Better Than Heroes, we run a Spelljammer Influence 5e campaign every Monday live on Twitch at 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, and we're also running another game of Tin Candles on our channel.
We can't stop. In
December. I don't think it's December 5th, Saturday, December 5th. I don't think we're gonna stop doing it because it's just too much fun, like you said, to do it in many different ways. So
you will have to bring me in for one of your 10 candles.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I don't think. Do it.
That would be amazing.
Cool. Well, thank you all very much for hanging out with us. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you all very much.
Don't forget, tip your DM.
Oh, yeah, tip your DM. See ya.